A very warm evening to one and all present here.
I feel immense pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Mr. Rituraj Phukan sir. He's an environmental writer, adventurer, and naturalist. Based out of Assam, a biodiversity-rich, climate change-impacted province in the northeast of India. He's the founder of Indigenous People Climate Justice Forum and also serves as vice president of Grassroots Coalition for Environmental and Economic Justice. He is a member of the International Union for Conservation of Nature and sits on the board of civil society groups in America, Europe, and Australia. Rituraj sir has personally experienced the impact of climate change in the polar frontiers of Arctic and Antarctic, in the Himalayas and the loss in the water towers of Asia, and is currently working on an initiative to mobilize civil society action in countries of Himalayan region. As the National Coordinator for Biodiversity for the Climate Reality Project India, Chief Operating Officer for Walk for Water, and Secretary General of Green Guard Nature Organization, he facilitates awareness and action on three W's: warming, water, and wildlife, working with all stakeholders, including indigenous communities, students, civil society, business, and media, for a positive change in climate change. Rituraj trained as a climate reality leader by Nobel laureate Al Gore and was featured in former US Vice President 2017 book An Inconvenient Sequel, Truth to Power. He authored the chapter Biodiversity in a Warming World in the Amazon #1 bestseller Climate Abundant, a book launched in USA on Earth Day 2019. Now, I would like to call Mr. Rituraj sir for his talk.
Thank you very much. First of all, while I get around to sharing my screen, a very good afternoon to all the students and faculty of uh, Hansraj College and Green Warriors Club. And thank you for having me here. Uh, Today is Nature Conservation Day, and to let me know when my screen is visible.
Screen is visible now.
Is, is it visible?
Yes, sir.
Perfect. Okay. So as you see, the topic for my talk today is connecting the three W's: warming, water, and wildlife. Although today is Nature Conservation Day, I feel, and it has become increasingly evident that all of these three planetary crises, that is uh, the climate crisis, the water crisis, and the biodiversity crisis, are related, they are intertwined, and the solutions are dependent on each other.
Hello.
Yeah. Hello.
Hello.
Yeah. Is my screen okay? And am I audible?
Yes, sir. So please continue.
Okay. I heard a hello anyway. Okay. So let me start with the weather report. Uh, June 2021 will perhaps go down in the history books as one of the worst ever extremely hot events where we saw heat waves across the world, especially in the northern hemisphere, increasingly so in the western parts of US, Canada, all of Europe, Africa, but surprisingly, India was spared that heat wave, although we can expect it to come in the coming next few months. And just look at the headlines here. Reliable world heat record from the very appropriately named Furnace Creek, Death Valley, California, 54.4 degrees Celsius on 9th July. And on 11th July, warmest night in North American history at 42.0 degrees Celsius. Imagine trying to sleep in that. Then light in Canada, which is just north of those areas, recorded 49.6 degrees Celsius. And 2 days later, this indigenous community settlement was actually wiped off the face of the earth by a wildfire. Looking at the way the three trajectories are likely to go, of course, they are way beyond what we expected from the Paris Agreement. Uh, I don't know if this trajectories on the right are visible, but at the current rates, the most likely scenario that we are going to see is 3.2 degrees Celsius warming of the entire planet above pre-industrial levels. That is way above the Paris Agreement target of 1.5 degrees Celsius, and even the 2 degrees Celsius, which would have been possible by what was agreed upon 6 years back at Paris. There's only 5% chance of staying below 2 degrees Celsius, and that is the same percentage as reaching 5 degrees Celsius. The most likely, of course, is 3.2 degrees Celsius, which would be disastrous. And that means triggering runaway warming is beyond our control. Droughts and famines for billions of people, leading to chaos and even wars. That is the world we are looking at, and it's not very far off 2100. Now, some of these slides, let me say at the outset, may be very alarming, but it is very important that young people like you are told about this. For too long, we haven't told about these alarming situations. And why you need to know is because the solutions lie with you. Young people are leading the climate movement around the world, and I think the solutions are within you. So it's best for all of you to grasp as much of information as you can about the climate crisis, about the available solutions, about the inaction by our political leadership, about how short-term profit making is driving decisions that is pushing your futures into great danger. All this has to be known by you so that you can be informed citizens. Take those when you are in decision making positions in a few years, you make the right decisions. Continuing with the heat waves, in many other places, Europe and Asia also saw this continuing heat waves. This is across the entire areas in the north, actually. Now, South America is, of course, going through a cold wave, but we are not going to dwell on that because uh, this is quite unlike anything that has happened before. June 2021 was actually the worst ever June for a long time. And even if you were to compare the records from the Industrial Revolution, you see the month of June was not as warm as it is now. It is difficult to even understand that temperatures used to be cold and pleasant during this month of June and July, just about 150 years back. But look at the towers now. It's all red and it's shooting up every year. And all this is happening on the planet that we endearingly call the blue marble. This is supposed to be cold and nice, 14 degrees Celsius, where life is good for everybody, all species, but it has totally been destroyed. And the consequences are very evident. Okay, the reason I showed you these videos is because when people think of floods, they think of my state, Assam. But floods are happening all over. Hundreds of people have died in Europe over the past 1 month. Now, why is this happening? What is this climate crisis? The basic problem is that we are treating the atmosphere as an open sewer, as a garbage dump where we're dumping about 150 million tons of global warming pollution every 24 hours. And that is having a disastrous effect. And all of the human development activities, it is not just the coal industry or the oil industry, but other activities, industrial agriculture, the production of food, meat especially, forest burning, all of this, land transport, even landfills, all of this adds up. Uh, Even bigger problem is, of course, the melting of the permafrost up in the Arctic and other snow-covered regions of the world. And but there's no doubt, of course, that the burning of fossil fuels, again, since the Industrial Revolution, and has added carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, which is the root cause of this great problem that we have found ourselves in. The hottest years, 19 of the 20 hottest years on record, have all happened within this century. Only 1998 was beyond us. So every year is setting new records. This is just incredible. This is happening within our lifetime. This is the climate crisis like we had never imagined would happen. Even the coldest places on Earth, Verkhoyansk, that is, this city was, we read in our geography books in school, the coldest place on Earth. It recorded 38 degrees Celsius last year. And the consequences are great. It is now some of you may think that okay, Greenland ice is melting, uh, maybe the polar bears will disappear. What does it matter for us? Well, the loss of sea ice now has been proved is directly related to global temperatures, especially the Indian monsoons or the southeastern monsoons, and it is already been disrupted. So we have, you know, this is all a global phenomenon. This is all interconnected. India, of course, is having its own heat waves, and it has been true for a few years before the rest of the world started feeling it. 2016, 5 years back, 51 degrees Celsius. Uh, we had heat waves, 50 degrees Celsius, when people were dying in mid-June 2 years back. So, what is India's climate challenge? There are three critical risk factors. Number one, high agricultural dependence. Again, it comes to the second W, the water that of my presentation. We'll come to that now. Two, the long coastline. Again, that makes us vulnerable to extreme weather events. Number three, high fossil fuel dependence. We know this is bad, but we are still starting new coal mines. We are still trying to open up uh, protected areas for mining. So unfortunately, uh, we are kind of digging our own grave. We are already facing the initial effects of climate change. Temperature is on the rise, of course. Rainfall is decreasing uh, at some places. At certain other places, it might be increasing. And extreme weather events are becoming more common. Unless we act now, India risks deeper, more systemic effects in the future. Now, last year, we had the first ever assessment of climate change over the Indian region, a report of the Ministry of Earth Sciences, Government of India. So they have said that temperature has increased by only 0.7 degrees Celsius. Now that looks very small, but if you look at what happened in the Hindu Kush Himalayas, during the same period, in the last 50, 60 years, temperatures have risen by 1.3 degrees Celsius. That means declining snowfall and accelerated melting of glaciers. Those are the Asian water towers where about 50% of the global human population is dependent on, with populous countries like China, India, of course, Bangladesh, Pakistan, all concentrated or dependent on those rivers that flow, that depend on the water from these glaciers. So that is something really of concern. We'll come to the water crisis again, but India has been seeing a lot of these climatic events. We are going to look at them about in a little bit of detail. Melting glaciers. We know the consequences. We have seen this Chamoli incident. Of course, in the last few days or weeks, we have had the landslides and cloudbursts and loss of lives which are happening across the Himalayas. So about 10,000 glaciers are receding at the rate of up to 30 to 60 meters uh, per decade. It's been happening for some years. In June 2013, in fact, 6,000 people died at the famous incident in Uttarakhand. Cyclones are again happening in May this year. Of course, Tokte claimed 155 lives of Mumbai. Then we have the cyclones Yash around Orissa. So this is the reality of climate change. Then we are having heat waves. It's getting hotter and hotter and hotter. Uh, Today is so blistering hot, 5 a.m. in the morning in Assam. I cannot go out of my house. I mean, it was never like this uh, during my childhood, during the years we were in school. But now, in the last 2 3 years, it is really becoming unbearably hot, even in the northeast, which you associated with much cooler temperatures than many other places. Then monsoon floods. Well, many parts of India have been flooded in the last few weeks. Like Maharashtra and Goa and Gujarat, I believe. And then landslides are common, and we are seeing so much of other effects. But there are other unknown consequences as well. Lightning strikes have killed so many people. In Assam, 18 elephants died, if you remember, a couple of months back from lightning strikes. Now, you must be wondering, what has lightning got to do with climate change? Well, there are studies which say that lightning strikes increase because of warming temperature. India is ranked among the top 10 worst affected countries uh, in this report of Global Climate Risk Index. And in terms of money, also, economic damage of US $10 billion from floods has been already estimated, plus $8 billion from cyclonic storms as well. Now, coming to the water portion of my presentation, for many people, the climate crisis is the water crisis. The disruption of the water cycle is basically what defines the climate crisis. We have read about storms and floods, but the same extra heat that evaporates water from the ocean also pulls out moisture from the soil, which causes longer and deeper widespread droughts. And that has been happening for a few years across India, leading to a great groundwater crisis in many, many parts where our rivers are drying up, and our lakes have disappeared in many places. As you can see, many riverbeds have been exposed. This is the river in Maharashtra. So about 54% of India faces high to extremely high water stress, and the problem is getting worse. Now, my area in the northeast, Assam, is not in this map, but according to predictions, it will very soon be one of the areas where we are likely to see water wars. I'll come to that, but India is among those countries overpumping the aquifers already. These headlines, I don't know if you remember them, these are from about 3 years back. Uh, India, the Niti Aayog said we suffer from the worst ever crisis in history. Please don't come to Shimla, locals speak to tourists. Washing is a privilege. All these headlines, there are others like don't use water during Holi. All of our lives are affected by water. Uh, and these are some of the figures in the Composite Water Management Index release. We are seeing 600 million people face high to extreme water stress currently, and about 2 lakh people die every year due to inadequate access to. These figures, I find them incredible. 20 feet, water tables are falling by 20 feet per year in some parts of Gujarat. 95% of wells are dried up in parts of Tamil Nadu. And yeah, this was the data-driven analysis published a few years back. We have heard the talk about water wars happening in the future. So where are the likely places? Now, the Ganga Brahmaputra Valley, that includes Assam, which is now known for its floods, a water abundant area. In fact, entire Ganga Brahmaputra belt, I think, is flood affected currently, but this is one of the areas that's likely to see water wars, and that is directly related to those accelerated glacial loss in this area. There was another a very interesting report about the Hindu-Kush Himalaya assessment. Of course, this goes into detail about the glacial loss, and this points out the extreme effect in northeastern region, in the eastern Himalayas, where we are set to lose about 95% of all glaciers if warming continues at current rates by the turn of the century. And even if we were to reach the 1.5-degree goal of the Paris Agreement, even then 64% glaciers will be gone. Now, interestingly, we have already reached 1.3-degree warming. So that means we are possibly going to lose most of these glaciers in the next 20, 30 years. Of course, this vegetation, this precipitation change and all this water availability has a huge impact on the vegetation, and it affects all the wildlife habitats. In fact, I always say that water is the local issue of global climate change for people and for biodiversity. And these headlines, we do not even think about what it means to have a water stress for animals. But monkeys killing each other, uh, elephants, they need 200 liters of water almost per day. Uh, it causes water stress, heat stress. Uh, they tend to migrate out from protected areas, get into conflict with people. So many things happen. Rhinos, similarly, when the rainfall patterns change, the grasslands tend to move, like it happened in Nepal, where they figured that they will probably lose all the rhinos to Nepal as they move with the shifting grass line. So there are these biodiversity impacts, and that is the wildlife part. In some parts of India, the nature of the wildlife habitat is changing. Uh, so we are seeing more deciduous forests coming, replacing those uh, the, the tiger forests. So we are seeing more tropical dry forests in place of deciduous forests. So when the prey, that is the deer, they move to another place, the tigers are usually unable to follow them because they are territorial, and there must be another tiger living in a protected landscape, and that leads to fight unto death. So these are a lot of cascading consequences. Now, coming in depth to the wildlife part, to the third W, the Living Planet report last year pointed out to a two-third decline in the global population of mammals, birds, amphibians, reptiles, and fish in less than 50 years, which is directly related to the emergence of pandemics like zoonotic diseases like COVID-19, of course. And this is likely to continue. And even a lot of our beloved animals are now in the extinct category. There are so many animals being pushed into the IUCN red list. Now it is hard to keep track. Almost all of the Gangetic dolphin, river dolphin, which is our uh, river animal, is also in this red list now. We now risk losing up to almost half of all the species on land within the century, and a third of plant and animal species within 50 years. These are all alarming reports, but we are going to look at some of the positives now. We have already started to take action. This year we had the first Rewilding Day by the Global Alliance, which I am a part of, by the way, on 20th of March. So rewilding is about helping nature heal itself. It is also about changing the way we think. We cannot continue to exploit nature for our gains, uh, and keeping recognizing that it is important to address biodiversity loss along with the climate crisis. The UN Decade for Ecosystem Restoration aims to recreate and restore many of the wild areas around the planet. We had the Mangrove Day 2 days back, and again, you can see how much of an impact that is having on the climate crisis, and how we can actually turn back a lot of the negative impacts by restoring some of these mangroves. The the IPCC 1.5-degree report published about 4 years back gave us about around 12 years to uh, take decisive action on climate change. Similarly, the Convention on Biological Diversity gives us about 10 years to restore the planet or suffer from catastrophic biodiversity loss, which will impact human well-being. Uh, Now we must remember that almost all the new diseases we are seeing in the last 50, 60 years, starting from SARS and CARS and MARS to Ebola to AIDS to all of these are actually zoonotic. So the greatest threat, I think, to human well-being in the future would come from viruses that lie buried in the permafrost in the Arctic, which are starting to re-emerge. We already had an outbreak of anthrax in Russia a few years back. Thankfully, it was controlled, and the source was identified as a dead wild reindeer which was buried in permafrost for a long, long time. And when it was exposed, uh, a passing domesticated reindeer got the anthrax and then it spread to humans. Thankfully, the source was uh, discovered in time and it could be contained. Uh, let's green our cities. Now we are going to look at some of the slogans of this UN Decade for Ecosystem Restoration, which was launched on World Environment Day, and of course how some cities are already doing it very successfully. Increasing green spaces. We are seeing green buildings coming up. We have seen so many green buildings in China, and other countries are following suit now with rooftop gardens. In fact, gardens on every floor outside the windows, which is good to keep the building cool, for biodiversity, for birds, and it also clears up pollution. We are going to look at a few cities which are now actually taking exemplary action. I hope you are able to see this. Sorry for that abrupt ending. I know some of you must be thinking, why can't we do this in Delhi, right? Or whichever city you are from. I think it can be done, and it is young people like you who must take charge of your future destiny and make this happen, right? If Madeline or Singapore can do it, I think definitely New Delhi and all the other cities in India can do it as well. Now, another thing is the transition to renewable energies. Now, people think that do you have enough sunlight? Now, India gets about 300 days of sunlight in a year, which is more than any other country in the world, probably. And 1 hour of sunlight actually is enough to meet the energy needs for a full year. Just imagine that. We are not investing in the research and development. We are not investing our money where it needs to be invented. Rather than having a billionaire's race to the moon or spending billions uh, on weapons for wars that are never going to happen. I think this is what we need to spend money on to ensure that we make a quick and just transition to renewable-based economy. Now, next, let's restore our grassland and savannas. Now, these were, I think, shrubs, grasslands, and savannas among the most diverse ecosystems that support so many of our iconic animals, from rhinos to horses to kangaroos to lions, and I think this is also where humans had the first impact by engaging in farming as well as livestock production. So we need to restore some of these and sorry, I think this came up in the wrong place. But anyway, yes, this is just looking at how we are already channelizing the wind energy. India is, of course, one of the leading countries in the wind power sector as well as the solar power sector. Our Prime Minister actually uh, initiated, along with the French President, in 2015, the International Solar Alliance. And I think these efforts are making a headway already in India's transition to wind and solar. But at the same time, we are also looking to exploit more and more coal, so which is a bit contradictory. So coming back to those wetlands and peats and you know the kind of why you need to restore these peatlands. Now, talking about peatlands across the Arctic, which is drying up because of excess heat, these are very prone to fire. So once it starts burning, entire areas are burned very quickly. Right now, I think 1.5 million hectares where of peatlands have been burned across Siberia in the past few weeks. So we have to restore many because they are very good stores of carbon, and we have to restore. Uh, Many of you are probably engaged in different kind of civil society who get involved in cleaning up riverbanks from this litter. It is very important to do that, I guess, and also spread awareness about how dumping plastic bottles and glass bottles and all they are destroying these ecosystems. So restoration also means to clean up riverbanks and wetlands from the debris or the human debris that we have created. Now we are going to look at another video about mangroves. I think we had the mangroves just 2 days back, and restoration of mangroves is a big step in the fighting. And then next, let's revive our mountains. So we are seeing how mountains occupy a lot of we were just talking about the Himalayas. So the mountains are very important. A lot of people live there. A lot of indigenous peoples live there, and they are also home to a lot of endemic species which are not found elsewhere. And they are very sensitive, and we have seen the reasons why they are very sensitive to human pressures as well as climate change. Let's bring back forests. So important. Forests around the world are being lost at an unprecedented rate. You might have read about how the Amazon forests have become a source rather than a sink of carbon dioxide in the past few years. Now it is for all of us to actually protect and restore these precious forests. And I would like to uh, talk about Jada Payang, my colleague and friend from Assam, who is known as the Forest Man of India. For 30 years, he toiled alone and created a forest where there was a desolate barren sandbank in the middle of the Brahmaputra, and nobody knew about that. And that forest, it has been 10 years since it was discovered, so he has been basically creating this forest for the last 40 years, and tigers and elephants live there now. And he never heard of the words called rewilding or restoration, or he never heard of the word sustainable living. No, but I think he is the poster man, the poster child of the rewilding movement or the restoration movement. And if one man can do so much, I think all of us together can do a lot, and we can definitely turn things around when it comes to restoration of these mountains and forests and wetlands that we just talked about. No talk about climate change can end without talking about the Paris Agreement, 2015 December. That is when, for the first time, 196 parties agreed upon a climate change uh, treaty, which is also very dynamic. Every 5 years, countries are supposed to ratchet up their ambitions. And although the Paris Agreement looked at 2%, limiting warming to 2% above the pre-industrial levels, we were expecting all the countries to ratchet up their ambitions within the next 5 years, that is 2020. But of course, due to the pandemic, COP26 has been postponed and it is going to be held at Glasgow in November this year. Uh, Hopefully it will be a full-fledged uh, in-person conference. Otherwise, we will again see things being postponed, and hopefully I'll be there as well. And here we expect this is probably one of the last and best chances for countries to stake up their ambitions and make sure that we somehow are able to work together. COVID-19 has shown us that countries can make things work together and ensure that warming does not cross 1.5 degree above pre-industrial levels, and so that we stop those catastrophic impacts. Uh, why we are doing all this, and many of us like to think that we are going to save the earth, but remember, we are actually trying to save the human race. We are trying to save ourselves. The Earth is there, will be there, even if all the ice were to melt at Antarctica and at Greenland, and we are to lose almost all of the coastal areas and maybe 50 or 60% of the current land mass. Still, there will be life on Earth. But with 4 or 5 degree of runaway warming, human beings will not survive. At least some projections say that the population may be drastically reduced to less than 1 billion. And such catastrophic events cannot be imagined what will be the consequences in society. So it is for us, I tell everybody, all my listeners, that we should be selfish. We are doing this for our future generations. We are doing it for the students. I'm doing it for my daughter. We have all to act together. We need to spread awareness, uh, prompt action, and ensure our leaders take the appropriate decisions. Going towards COP26, India must step into the leadership role by scaling up our ambitions and showing the right intent. And we really have to move away from the age of coal. Thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing your questions.
Thank you so much, sir, for such an informative talk. Now I would request the participants to put their questions in the chat box or raise their hand. Sir, there is a question. Is
Yeah,
there
sure.
any relation between the pandemic and the climate change?
Uh, well, you asked about the current COVID-19 pandemic and climate change. Well, one thing is certain, that destruction of nature, of forests, and natural ecosystems uh, get us into more contact in various ways that leads to more zoonotic diseases. And it is not just the COVID-19 pandemic, but all the viruses and other uh, bacteria-borne diseases that have jumped on in the last few decades have been zoonotic, almost all of them. And the climate crisis worsens it because many of the vectors, especially mosquitoes, they thrive in climatic conditions. In some parts of the world, because of warming, the mosquitoes are reproducing twice in a particular year, whereas in the past they would only do so once. So that increases the possibility of spread of vector-borne diseases. Warming has also made the diseases which were restricted to some particular areas of the world spread into newer areas, like chikungunya, malaria, dengue, all of these have spread from particularly limited territories to across the world. And most importantly, like I said earlier in my presentation, we know there are hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of viruses buried under the snow in the permafrost. And when that melts, we do not know what kind of viruses are going to cause. And scientists fear that the next pandemic is lurking somewhere beneath uh, the permafrost. So yes, climate change is related to the pandemic. In many ways, it worsens the conditions, and in fact, the future worries are about such pandemics uh, emerging from climate change impacts in the Arctic. Thank you.
Another question is, do you think we can promote the conservation of nature using social media? Like in this COVID period, we all are in our homes. So, how we can conserve nature at this time?
Absolutely. I think social media is a great empowering tool, and I would like to give you a couple of examples of how social media can actually influence policy decisions. I don't know, last year you would have heard of a couple of incidents. The first one was, of course, about extension of coal mining in an area called the Dihing Patkai Wildlife Sanctuary, which is now, of course, has been promoted to the status of a national park. But those days, there was a lot of social media campaign led by youngsters. I am Dihing Patkai trended across Twitter and other social media, and it forced the government to take action. And set up inquiry committees into why and how, what were the irregularities in allowing coal mining, and then I think the elevation of the Patkai from a wildlife sanctuary to a national park was a successful uh, social media campaign. Similarly, there was this oil well blowout at Bakzan, again in Assam. Again, the young people, sitting at home during the pandemic took to social media, and then that also created a lot of awareness around it. Similarly, with the draft EIA, which was circulated last year, I think that was a lot of awareness spread about the EIA, the disastrous consequences of some of those proposals became widely known because of social media. So yes, social media can definitely go a long way in conservation. So please continue to use them.
Sir, I have a question.
Yeah, please go ahead.
सर इकोसिस्टम के रिस्टोरेशन के लिए केवल अवेयरनेस ही काफी है या कुछ और फैक्टर्स भी इम्पोर्टेंट है कि खाली अवेयरनेस मतलब
Okay, I think I got your question. So awareness is, see, action comes before, action comes after awareness. So when people are aware, when people know that destruction of a wetland can have disastrous long-term consequences for the environmental health of the neighborhood or of the locality of the region, then I think there will be action, remedial action to correct all the exploitation that is happening. For example, in many places in Assam, we saw that the wetlands were treated as wastelands at one point of time. And if you look at the Ramsar site, deeper bill, there was a garbage dump. In fact, it is still there. But because of awareness drives, because of continuous awareness being generated and people demonstrating, now the government is forced to take action. They are talking about shifting the garbage dump. They are talking about keeping the wetland free of pollutants. They're talking about restoring the wetland to its former glory. So yes, awareness is very vital for action. Action will happen only if there is awareness. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, sir.
there is another question. How we can increase the effectiveness of the institutional policy of nature protection and biodiversity?
Well, on paper, India has a very good environment impact assessment policy. Now, it is very important to balance between development and environmental concerns. And I think even back in the 1990s, owing to these same concerns, we got this environment impact assessment. So every development project had to go through what were the effect on the environment around them, on the people who were dependent on a natural environment. But many of the provisions have been diluted over time, and especially now with the draft EIA 2020, uh, without public participation, with so many new proposals coming into exempt public participation to exempt uh, permissions, I think these will be diluted. So it is very important that policies are actually strengthened, not diluted, especially when we talk about the importance of ecological restoration. India is a signatory to the UNFCCC. We are committed to create an additional carbon sinks through forestation, and no amount of monoculture forestation can replace our primary forest. So while creating new forest areas, we have also to ensure that all standing native forests or primary forests are protected. Uh, Similarly, we are also a signatory to the Convention on Biological Diversity, and one of the aims for the 3030, one of the aims for the decadal framework that starts post 2020 is the 30 by 30 method, which aims to protect 30% of all land areas and 30% of all marine areas for nature forever, prioritizing areas of biological diversity. That means we have to ensure better protection for our existing grasslands, wetlands, rivers, forests, and mountains, whereas also elevating the protected status of those which are probably now disturbed and not as protected as they should be. Otherwise, India, we have around 20% of protected land areas. How are you going to adhere as a signatory to the Convention on Biological Diversity? How are you going to adhere to that commitment to increase it to 30%? We have to bring areas of uh, biological diversity in the Western Ghats, in the Northeast, in the Himalayan foothills, which are biodiversity rich. We have to bring them into protective coverage. So these are the, I think, policy interventions that are very important. Thank you.
Okay, sir. So there is this is the last question.
Okay.
In your opinion, what are the most effective methods of nature protection and biodiversity currently?
Okay. Sorry. Can you repeat that question?
Yes, sir. In your opinion, what are the most effective methods of nature protection and biodiversity currently?
Yes. So I think the most important and most overlooked method of nature protection, of biodiversity protection, as you rightly framed the question, is to ensure that the indigenous and local communities who have been doing it for generations, for millennia, are recognized. Who can protect the forests around them better than the communities who live in them or near them, right? So I think we have to recognize the rights of the indigenous people. We have to recognize the traditional knowledge of the indigenous and local communities who have been living with nature, who have been practicing sustainability even before the word was coined. Now there is a tendency now, among conservationists who come freshly into, how they will highlight indigenous people hunting away and depending on forest resources. But you have to remember that they have lived with these forest resources in a sustainable way for thousands and thousands of years. Their traditional knowledge includes such measures which ensures that all species within that habitat are able to survive. We have to continue that. We have to recognize that. I think India and the world is now slowly coming together to recognize the indigenous rights, and this is a great step forward. I think this is the most important area that has been ignored for a long time. Even India, with I think over 400, maybe around 300 million indigenous peoples, would be very much important for India to benefit from the traditional knowledge of all the different communities, the tribal communities that inhabit most of these natural areas, whether it is forest or mountains or riverbanks. So yes, I think that is the most important area for me.
Thank you, sir. Now I would like to call Soumya, President of GWC, for vote of thanks.
Thank you, Bharti. On behalf of Green Warriors Club Hansraj College, I, Soumya Agrawal, express our immense gratitude to our Honorable Chief Guest, Mr. Rituraj Phukan, sir, for being with us on this event. Your presence and gentle words have been a source of knowledge for all of us. We wholeheartedly thank you for your wisdom, sir. I would also like to thank our team who worked hard to make this event successful and our audience for paying attention to the webinar. Thanks again, sir.
Thank you very much.
Now, I would request the audience to please fill the feedback form present in the chat box. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, and I hope to connect with you again. Bye.
Definitely, sir.
सब गए चैट बॉक्स में
Excuse me, ma'am.
Don't have the access to chat box, can contact Manika or Khushi for the feedback form.
Ma'am, can you send the feedback form on WhatsApp group?
यस
Uh,
मैम
sorry, I can't actually share because many people have not attended the webinar after filling the form. So the certificates will be given only to those who have.
मैम हमें चैट बॉक्स में नहीं मिल
Yes.
You can see the screen. You can contact Manika or Khushi for the feedback form.
Okay, ma'am.
The
Okay,
numbers
ma'am.
are on the screen.
ऑनलाइन ही नहीं है इनके पास कॉल करने का
मैम मनिका मैम तो ऑनलाइन ही नहीं है
She'll reply you and give you the feedback form. It will be open. Don't worry.
ठीक है
Just send her the text.
ओके मैम